What's up everybody and welcome to Sunnyside TV, and today we're taking a look at Little Town Hero on the Nintendo Switch, developed by Game Freak, the makers of Pokemon. And while it may be developed by the makers of Pokemon, does it bear any resemblance to our beloved franchise? Let's find out in this review. Before I start the review, if you guys end up liking this video, please consider hitting that like button and sub to the channel for more gameplay and game reviews. But as for the question that I asked earlier about the only thing this game has in common with Pokemon is the fact that I have a rival. The game is its own entity for good or bad, and it left me feeling of being one of the hardest games I've had to review all year based on how conflicted I was at the end of it. The story here is actually pretty simple. You are in a secluded town walled off from the world and full of people who have never been on the outside. You, the hero, want to adventure out, but your curiosity gets the best of you. Mysterious monsters start showing up, and all of a sudden you're the only one who's able to combat these monsters who appear. The story has its charming moments, with the dialogue being funny at certain points, with the crazy cast of characters, but overall it's more on the bland and boring side for me, and it had me skipping dialogue more than I care to admit. The main thing you'll be doing in this game besides following the main story is the combat and gameplay, and Little Town Hero is a JRPG with strategy combat, and boy oh boy, I'm going to try my best to explain what is probably some of the more complicated turn-based strategy combat I've experienced all year. But in the simplest form, the only way that I can think of how to explain this combat is that it's more along the lines of a card game or a TCG. Now you have these ideas, aka cards, which are named like Charge or Tight Guard, with 3 different colors to indicate what type of idea it is. The red ideas are attack cards and are only one of 2 ways to inflict damage to the enemy. Then you have the yellow ideas that are the defensive cards that act as your defense and means that you can't get hit if you have one of these up to counter the enemy. Then the blue ideas are more along the lines of draw cards or buff cards or a magic type spell that can do direct damage or do a special action. Now the yellow and red ideas will have an attack number indicated by the red sword, meaning how much damage it will inflict either against your opponent's idea or onto an enemy shield. The blue shield at the bottom of an idea or the card is how much damage the idea can take before it disappears. Now, like any card game, you have a certain amount of actions you could take that ramps up, which simply is just called power in the game. Each idea card takes up a certain amount of power to activate the card and put it in play, which then slowly ramps up the longer the game goes until you can have a maximum of 6 power per game. Essentially, the goal of the combat in Little Town Hero is to counter the enemy with your ideas to their ideas by lining up the correct attack numbers to take out the enemy's defense idea numbers, also making sure that they have run out of ideas in your one turn and you have enough to at least have 1 attack idea left over at the end of a given turn to inflict damage until the 3 hearts run out. Keeping in mind you can only inflict 1 heart damage every turn. If all this sounds a little complicated, well, that's because it is. It took me many hours until I figured out what I was doing, and the boss battles in this game can take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, or even more if you keep failing and you're still learning how it all works. As a matter of fact, I think Game Freak anticipated people were going to fail a lot with the combat, as even if you lose and start over, the game gives you a skill point at the end of the game over just for your effort. That tells me they knew how complicated this combat was and how much it goes into it, and how difficult the boss fights are, even if you know what you're doing. Now, I gave you the simplest explanation I could to explain the combat, but really this game's 100% centered around it, so if you're not digging what you're seeing, I'm not sure you're going to enjoy Little Town Hero. Now, as for some form of progression, the game does feature a skill tree of sorts that works on buffing your ideas with skill points called Eurekas. It's pretty simple. You get a buff to your ideas with a single attack or defensive number, or a buff to your blue ideas. This isn't really anything in depth, and it's pretty straightforward progression, but the game does feature some side quests that are pretty useful to do as well. In this example, I helped this little girl, and it led to this lady helping me in combat situations. Another aspect to the combat is after every turn you move throughout the battle area, and your movement is determined by the roll of a dice or an idea that can help you choose your movement specifically. If you land on certain spots that feature your friends or your family, they can help you out in the combat situations. This ends up feeling like a board game type scenario, and frankly kind of negatively, in my opinion, added to the length of the game and the boss fights, and these fights, like I said, could go on for a long time. Now at this point, if you're thinking I'm going to give the game a bad rating, not necessarily. In the end, while the combat is overly complicated. Once I figured out what I was doing, I really liked how chess-like it was to have to think ahead, though I hope you're really good at math because I think you're going to need it. And there was also a bit too much RNG in the sense of what ideas you would get, aka cards. The cards that you could get could help you counter the more difficult monsters, but sometimes you just wouldn't get it. But in the end, if you really thought out your turns, you would get ahead eventually. It's easily the most unique strategy combat I've seen in a while personally, and while I hated it at the start, it really started to grow on me once I figured out what I was doing. You can tell the developers were trying to do something different in the sense of getting rid of pointless trash fights and giving you nothing but important big fights, but my counter to them would have been to give me more varied boss fights that require less time to beat versus having fights that can take an hour long plus. In the end, it comes down to, did I enjoy my time with Little Town Hero and its simple story mixed with a complicated combat? I did, but I recognize that this game didn't come out of the box at $60 for a reason, because there just isn't really much here under the hood at the end of the day, and based on that value, I will rate it as much. The combat is super slow and the story just isn't that interesting at the end of it. My final score is a 6 out of 10. I enjoyed my time here, but in the end, there wasn't much that continued my excitement after I first booted up this game and realized what this was. It did enough to make a game that stood apart, but not enough in the end for me to say it's a must buy. But alright guys, that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys for watching. If you've enjoyed this review, please consider hitting that like button and sub to the channel for more game reviews and gameplay videos, as well as hitting that notification bell. But I'm Sunny. Thank you all again for watching. I hope you all have a sunny day.